Those Space People, a podcast series of casual cosmic conversations with people working on exciting space projects. Today we have with us Nithish Kumar. Nithish is an aerospace engineer who's currently with a VC firm called Speciale Invest as part of their investment team. He's previously donned a plethora of roles in space education and outreach, product marketing, community management, among a bunch of others. So, Nithish, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Rasna. It feels really good to be on the other side of the mic just for once.
Yeah, you had your own podcast, and we are going to talk about it soon. But before we actually dive into your work at Speciale, let's talk about your proudest accomplishment in your words, right? So on your LinkedIn, I love how you start with ALINEA is a failed passion project of mine. That sounds incredible. I'm sure there's a wonderful story behind it. So please do tell us more about that.
Sure. So I think this was a few years back. I think 2, 3 years back when there was COVID around, and this was around 2020 when basically all of us had not a lot of things to do, but just to stay inside and figure out our own paths. I think that was when I was in my final year of college, and I basically had a lot of free time to do. Of course, whatever I'd been doing before that was like priming me towards this whole journey of entrepreneurship, startups, and all of that through my podcast and a few other things that I was doing on the side. And I thought, hey, I have so much time now, and maybe this is the good time for me to try something on my own and then start up. We decided that me and my friends in college decided that we'd start something, and a bunch of us got together. We registered a company. We spent about a year or so trying to build what would eventually we would have liked it to be the startup pitching platform or the fundraising platform for the country. Of course, this was largely inspired by the Shark Tanks of the world in the US and all of that. When I was a very big fan of that, and I thought that's just something that I could do, given that I'm working with all of these entrepreneurs through other means, forms, or shapes. And this is something that genuinely excites me, and this is a real problem, especially when the ecosystem was just about starting to really take boom and take strides. Yeah, that's. I think we were very naive to think that we could make it work, but we absolutely loved it. The whole year that we had spent, we spoke to about 6, 7, 8 investors. We got about 5, 6 folks who agreed to join us on the fundraising platform. We just didn't want it to be a platform. We wanted it to be like a show, how Shark Tank is back then. We went to Z5, we went to, I think, Sony Lives of the World. Yeah, we didn't get very far with all of those, given that we're all students and we basically had no money to doing nothing whatsoever. But it was still a great experience. We couldn't launch it at the end of the day, and eventually it was like it had been 1.5 years since the time we had started, and my friends wanted to move on and then find out something, because all of us were graduating at that point in time and we had to find our own ways. So I decided that it was time to call it. Absolutely loved the whole 1 year journey of trying to build something that's way beyond ourselves, and there was absolute naivety in everything that we did. We did a lot of stupid things. I looking back, I don't think I'd change anything. I think it's because of that I'm exactly here right now talking to you and a lot of other folks in a very happy place, at least from a career perspective. So I'm very happy that's how it turned out. But yeah, I think it's just one of those things that you decide you want to do it, and then you just go about doing it. And whether it works out or not, you just give it a shot and then see where you end up. I think it a lot of people in my life are confused at that point in time as to what I was trying to do. All my life, I built this whole story for myself that I do something with space, either become a scientist at ISRO, or do something on those lines, or go for my master's abroad, study aerospace and whatnot. But yeah, I think through the course of my third and fourth year, I realized I have to search for something else in my life, and maybe this is not something that I want to do long term, which is space. Yes, a lot of people were confused, and it was quite fun, that whole journey. But I think eventually everybody realized that there's nothing wrong in trying stuff like that and all of that. So it turned out quite good. Yes. So I think that still remains my proudest accomplishment till date. We tried something really big, very naive, very stupid, and we got somewhere, but didn't work out. But we are here because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is pretty amazing that you convinced, as someone who's just starting out into the professional world, you've managed to convince investors to actually come on board. I would say that's pretty amazing. You have any clue? Have you followed these investors if they eventually invested in space or what they've done later?
Absolutely. So they did. So one of the investors is Vishesh of Special Invest, who I work at now, whose firm I work at now. Special is probably one of India's most active space tech investors. They've done about 5 investments across the entire space tech value chain. And all of the other, I think, it was Mahesh Muthi of Seed Fund, who had done a Kawa Space. That was also one of India's earliest geospatial startups as such. Yeah, so people have done a lot of investments in space as well after that. Yeah.
Nice. So you kickstarted all of them into space, into their own space journeys.
No.
Pretty awesome. So let's come back to your current role at Speciale, as you just spoke about Speciale, what they do, and what exactly does an aerospace engineer do at a VC firm?
I think in a way it turned out to be quite lucky. I think I'm pretty lucky to have found my place at Speciale because Speciale is a deep tech firm as such. Essentially, we fund a lot of very science slash IP driven companies that has great potential for impact and so on and so forth. And it turns out, Speciale is very big on space tech. And like I mentioned, probably one of the most active space tech investors who has invested across the entire space value chain as such. So a lot of what we do, and space is not the only domain that we invest in. We've done semicon, robotics, synthetic bio, life sciences, industry, manufacturing, drug discovery. So anything about the sun, under the sun, that qualifies as deep tech, I think is something that we're really interested to see how we can support and then help. So I think you'd have to have people within the fund who are technologists at heart. It's just not enough if you're very finance driven as such, just to be able to understand some of the things that you're evaluating from the startup's perspective in terms of what they're building, in terms of how the founders have gone about their job, what exactly is differentiating them. I think all of that, it requires that you have an element or a DNA of science or engineering in you to be able to really get to the ground and then find out and be able to work with the entrepreneur as such. So, especially coming in at the earliest stage, it's just not enough that you invest money and then you say, multiply my money by several folds and we'll come back. It is also very important that when the entrepreneur or the founder is at the 0 to 1 stage, you're on the ground with them and then you try and help them out with a lot of other things. For that, it requires that you have that understanding, you have that knowledge somewhere. So I think in that sense, I got pretty lucky that I got into Speciale because again, I'm an engineer at heart. I love physics and I'm a science person at heart. And then it turns out that I was also very curious about the business side of things. So in a way, it was the perfect marriage of both of those things. That's like allowing me to be able to help some of the founders who are building very cool deep tech from India for the world. But yeah, I think that's what an aerospace engineer does. In fact, most of us within the fund are technologists, are the policy people, very few finance people fund as such. But yeah, I think that is in a way helping us get to understand a lot of these things from a very first principle standpoint. For example, there was a company that I was looking at that was in the therapeutic space. The founder had spent about 16 years in Switzerland and he'd spent, I think he's gotten 2 postdocs, he's spent time with the Scripps Institute, and he decided that he wants to start up and then he comes to Chennai and he started a company and he's also published in Nature and all of that, right? And he's building a cancer therapeutics platform that maybe 2 or 3 people in the world can build because it's based out of his own publication, his own research as such. So when I was spending time with the founder, I couldn't understand the ABCs of what he was building because the building blocks of biotech, the building blocks of that whole world is very different from that of anything else. And so I had to spend quite a bit of time reading his research papers, understanding what he's trying to build, to even grasp things at a high level, to be able to go back and say, I understand why you're building and I understand that this is what you're building. So let me find out how to help you. I think that perspective does not easily come if you do not have that DNA or a background. And yeah, I think this investing side of the world also requires people who've spent time like that to come in and say, I want to do this. So yeah, and in a way, I'm just lucky to be here and lucky to be interacting with all of these cool founders building very cool stuff.
And you mentioned that a lot of people in your VC firm also have engineering background. So how and policy background. How did these people find this opportunity in the Speciale Invest? Did you go on a recruitment to, I believe it's mostly through networking?
Yes, I think seldom do we find people getting hired into VC through placements and all of that because it's just a very small cottage industry. I think there are less than 2,000 people in VC in India for the whole country, if you can imagine, and a very handful of firms investing a lot across all of these startups and very particular sector focuses and all of that. It can be a very meritocratic domain, to be quite honest, and either people look for absolute pedigree that you'd have to be from some of the top colleges in the country and probably did an MBA and whatnot. The other side of the spectrum is that you've really done something that's out of syllabus and you've really punched above your weight, that it is through some form of serendipity that you find opportunities like this that you can come in. I think I'm just lucky that The latter part for me was the path that I took, and I ended up here. I think some of the people, even within our funds, were people who had done vastly different things in their careers. One of my colleagues spent a lot of time at Toyota Ventures. Sorry, the Toyota, not the Toyota Ventures, the Toyota's manufacturing plant here. So he understood the Japanese way of doing things, Japanese way of engineering as such, as to how all of these operations are managed, how all of these systems are put together, how they're very precise about whatever they do. And it's just, you just find people like that. And one of our members had also, he spent time at Harvard in public policy, and then he came back here to do consulting, and he worked at a mobility fund and all of that, and then eventually found his place in specialty here. I think all of us are very different backgrounds, and I think it's just that through serendipity or through happenstance, you find opportunities like this that you get into. And that is also why it's interesting, because you never know when a VC firm is hiring or not. Most firms maybe do not go out actively posting anything online or say that they're hiring, but it's just that you'd have to find your way to be able to get into touch with some of these folks, either through networking or through some form, shape, or method that you'd eventually, that will allow you to get into at least this whole world, and from there you can find your whole way into this domain. I think for me it was, again, I was a little lucky because I had Vishesh on one of my podcasts back in college. So that was my entry or wedge that I would eventually go on to utilize or make use of 2 3 years later. But yeah, I think you just have to find opportunities like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also interesting. Speaking about finding opportunities, you've done like a plethora of things in the space industry, and let's say in and around the space industry. So we're also briefly with Team Indus, then you were with SEDS doing education and outreach, and so on and so forth. So how did you find all these opportunities? How did you even think of these? Are like quite some segues. So how did you chart this path? How did you chart this path for yourself?
No, I think it might sound too big coming from somebody so young, but I think I was just really honest about what I wanted, and if I'm really enjoying something or not when I'm doing it. I think I was just aware enough to notice that if I was doing something right or wrong, or if I'm really enjoying something. And then I was also, in a way, a little bold and stupid enough to just throw everything out and then start from scratch and try something new. Like I said, I think all my life I wanted to do something with space. That's why I chose aerospace engineering as a degree to study. And even before I got into my college, I browsed and found out that there was a club called SEDS in my college back in 2016-17. And I'd reached out to people there even before I joined the college and said, "Hey, I want to come and work with you after I joined." People are quite surprised. I think that's just me. I think I'm a little curious like that. And so after I got into the college, I eventually ended up joining the club, and I ended up contributing a lot. And they wanted me to explore SEDS India. I explored that as well. Luckily, I was able to secure, I think, the position of the executive director as such. So wherein it just means that you're one of the nodal points of contact for all of the SES chapters in the country across multiple universities. So that in turn gave me a little more exposure to how people at other colleges operate, how are they thinking about building, how are they thinking about projects, and what is their level of exposure like really into industry, academia. For example, we would find out that there is a whole competition that exists that we did not know of at a university level, because some other team at some other chapter was building for it, and they've been spending huge money. For other colleges it was very remote, it was very quite eye opening, right? And it's a source of inspiration and spark as well, that, oh wow, these guys are seeming to build it, and this is how they're building their own playbooks to be able to get some of the sponsorships money. This is how they're operating, this is who they're talking to in the industry. And I think that in turn, what I did was two things. One, I made sure that part of the knowledge is transferred to all the other people in the network, whoever wants to build. And then second part is that I always made it a point to contribute a little bit here there as well. So I think people ended up liking that, and I eventually got to lead the whole SEDS India chapter as the chairman. And that means that you're the nodal point of contact for SEDS across the world. So every country has their own SEDS chapters and all of that. And yeah, it was quite fun. I got exposed a little more into the international side of things, how universities abroad, some of the top places in the world operate. And that gave me furthermore insight as to how we can be better, how we can do better, do more as such. And I also made sure that part is like transferred to our own folks here to see how we can just basically punch way above our weight and then give our dreams a real shot. So I enjoyed that whole path, and this was again right through college, and that was the SEDS journey. And I think where I'm going from here is that I think I've been really proactive throughout my college to be able to find pockets of opportunities like these, to be able to meet people who can open more doors and all of that. In a way, I think it just came very naturally to me, and I really hustled a lot. And I think it was in my second year or first year of college when somebody in a random WhatsApp group, I think it may have been one of these sets groups, that posted that Team India has had an internship opportunity for students in college. Register if you want. And that was the first time that I actually even got to know about Team India. I didn't know anything about it. And I did not even know about the startup ecosystem at all back then. But the moment I saw that, I was like, oh, let's give it a shot. I applied and I got in. And I think I'd spent that summer there. And that kind of like really changed the whole trajectory of where I would be going and what I'd be doing in life. I think we spoke about this in person when we were there as well in Bangalore 2 3 weeks back. It's just that for the first time when I entered that, I didn't realize that startups can have such great office spaces. I went inside, I'm like, wow, this is very cool. You see suddenly planets, stars, and all of that punched in the ceilings, random space components and parts hanging here and there. It was just a dream come true in the sense that you look at everything that you've either looked at on a monitor or on TV or on your computers or on the internet in real life in front of your eyes. And they had a whole another factory set up by the side wherein you could actually go and look at the lander that they were building, which is a lunar lander module. Suddenly you can go touch it, you can go feel it, and you can go tinker with it and all of that. And it was just the it felt like I was in a dreamland of sorts for the lack of a better word. And for me it was a very that exposure was shockingly great to that whole world of startups. And at the end of the internship, through the internship, I got to work on the rover wheel modules that they were building and all of that on the mechanical design part. And at the end of the internship, I had a very brief chat with Rahul Narayan, who was the founder of Team Indas back then. And that whole 15-minute conversation kind of put a spark in my head. Suddenly I started feeling that if I feel so excited about just coming to this place and it has a whole energy vibe and just working on whatever it is that these guys are working on, I wonder what the guy who's running the show really feels like. And I decided that I want to find out more. So I came back to my college and then I started a podcast. And through my sales network, I knew, I think, a few people. I knew Rohan of Bellatrix and a few other people who also, I think, all of them. And I messaged them saying that, hey, I want to do this. And would you be happy to join me on the podcast? And I think within the next 1 hour or so, all of them said yes. And suddenly I had to figure out a way to learn how to do a podcast and then figure out everything else around it. So I decided that I would give myself 2 months time and find out whatever I had to do. And then so I set up time with every single one of them for that summer. And I had 2 months time. So I learned about how you use all of these equipments. I saved up some money to buy some of these equipments as well. And so I ended up traveling that whole summer to Bangalore here and there all alone with a backpack full of cameras, mics, and all of that. Yeah, it was a really great opportunity for me to go look at what these people are building firsthand. I made it a point that I would come in person and then look at their office and then do it there and not just online. Because again, that was an opportunity for me to go look at things that's being built hands on. And that was the whole podcast journey as such. And through that journey, again, I met a lot of people in the Indian space tech ecosystem back then who were building very cool stuff. And I think as a young kid trying to do something or trying to really hustle, that kind of exposure and talking to these people really changes you and allows you to think, allows you to dream more, I think, in a way, right? Because these are people who are giving up, sacrificing up on so much of their lives to be able to do something that's way above them, that's just beyond any single one person. And maybe that whole experience allowed me to really get this perspective at such a young age that would eventually help me or allow me to be more stupid to be able to go out and start something in my college and eventually meet up a lot of people like Vishesh of Special and a few others that I would start something, fail, and then I would work somewhere and then I would eventually find my place here at Special in VC. So it's really about being very honest with what you'd want at every single point in time in your life, and then about being very uh, bold, courageous, or stupid enough to be able to make those hard choices. I think it took a lot of me to be able to let go of space and then really try and find something else, because R&D is not something that I saw myself doing a lot more. And I had to find this whole business angle and the people angle towards this whole space industry that I'd find my connect back in. For that, I had to let go of everything, let go of whatever I'd planned for myself to be able to find out. But as it turns out, things do work out and dots do connect. So I'm happy where I am. And yeah, I think just these 2 or 3 things on the exposure really allowed me to be crazy enough to try all of these things across whatever years.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. And speaking about your podcast, Unbounded is the name of the podcast. right? And what value did you personally get out of these podcasts? Because as a fellow podcaster, podcasting is a very lonely journey. It can be very unrewarding.
Yeah.
Unless you personally get something out of it, there's no point. So for me, it's a wonderful networking tool, and I love talking to people from the space industry. So that's what I get from it. But what kept you going, and then you also discontinued after a while, right? So what really happened?
I think it was very phased out in the sense that initially it was out of pure curiosity of just finding out about how all of these people think, which is the founders, that really pushed me to start something like that. And I also had more time in college for me to be able to explore all of these things. So I think in that sense, I really started out and then went all in back then. And I spent about 2 to 3 years. I think may have been 1 or 2 years that I was doing that. And what I took away back then, like I mentioned, was that again for me it was largely the exposure that I was getting to some of these people. And in a very longer conversation, it's very hard to find time with all of these people also, given that they're so busy with whatever they're doing. It allowed me to actually spend 2 3 hours with each of them, and that was invaluable. You just don't get to hear bits and pockets of wisdom advice from them at a very shallow level. Instead, you get an opportunity to really deep dive and then understand why they're saying what they're saying in a more contextual sense, right? For example, I was meeting Gadadhar of Nopo, and I think it may have been in that conversation that he had mentioned that this is one of the hardest things that he had done in life, and he thought about starting for about 11 12 years before he actually ended up starting up. And he was just and he was explaining about all of his postdoc, all of his academia journey, and how he had spent time with the professor who in turn worked at Smalley, and how he would eventually go on to try and build some of the best carbon nanotubes in the world. Part of that whole conversation is to just to pick up on the advice and the important bits and then say, so this is how you go about the journey. But the other side is also to be able to say, you just spend 10 11 years thinking about it before you start, and imagine that whole journey that the founder went through, and how much of pressure they've taken for themselves to be able to even do what they're doing. And even now, there's you can never tell with any founder if their startup will succeed or not. It's just such a lonely journey as such. So you can be inspired about meeting these people and then getting to learn from these people, but you very rarely get the opportunity to understand them. I think for me, podcasting was a great excuse. I'll put it like that. To be able to spend that 2 3 hours. For example, yeah, the first podcast I shot with Nopo, it took me 4 5 hours to just because I didn't know how to use all of these setups. I didn't know how to do the cameras and all of that, the mics and all of that. And I said, Gadadhar, please go do your work. I'll just give me 2 hours time. And I took 3 hours, and he came back and said, oh, you're still figuring this out. I'm like, oh, yes. And then he got lunch for me. And then we ended up shooting for another couple of hours. That amount of time just being able to spend. And it's you don't just spend time like that, right? You also talk to the people there. You also talk to the employees they are working. What does it feel like to work at a startup? And what do you take away from these? All of these are added perspectives that not a lot of people will get, but can be very easily overlooked upon. I think for me, podcasting was a really great excuse and an opportunity to be able to do all of these. And so I think I just went ahead and did that. And this might have been another episode with Nikita of SSCRD, I think, where she was speaking about how she had given up on very great jobs and opportunities to be able to do what she's doing. And for me, that was mind blowing. I'm like, wow, the whole world where I come from does not look at moving ahead in career like this. These people think in exponential curves, and a lot of the and most part of the world, at least where I come from, think very linear in the sense that, hey, this is a set path that you have to pick up because a lot of other people have also done that. It's just a really safe thing to be able to do all of that. And so, in a way, I think I learned to be able to think like this exponentially by meeting all of these people and all of that. I think in that sense, the podcast part really helped me a lot. And then when I decided, I think I'd spent about 1 2 years shooting a few episodes whenever I could. And when ALINEA began, I really could not spend too much time on the podcasting part at all because there was a lot to figure out there. And so I decided that I would just take a small break, and that break seemingly extended a little bit. And so I think it's just that I would really love to be able to do that now, but I'm also struggling to get back into the rhythm of things, get back into doing all of that, just because it just takes so much of your time. But I'm going to be very honest. I think the whole platform that you've shown me today and how you've set up all of these, it really makes me think like it might be worth giving it another shot, because it doesn't seem like it's a lot of effort. with recording and all of that. Maybe I think I also took too much pressure because I wanted to do everything in person and I wanted to do everything on the DSLR cameras and all of that, right? So maybe if I remove some of that, I find the fun again. So I'll try that out.
Yeah, when you actually remove the video component, I guess it becomes exponentially easier because even for the guests, it's way easier. And if you're in different time zones as well, they can just wake up and then show up just like that on your podcast
Yeah.
without really having to make themselves presentable.
If you're up for it, I think maybe we'll get started and I'd love to be able to interview you. And that could be my starting point back into podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can talk all about podcasts and how we can lament about our lonely journeys together. And
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
so, before your role at Speciale, Nitish, did you have to get any additional courses or any kind of certifications?
Oh, nothing like that. I think it's just that you had to have some kind of exposure into the whole startup world, the startup ecosystem. That if you're able to empathize with some of these entrepreneurs and really understand what it takes to be able to build, I think that's more than enough qualification. Because when it comes to VC, it doesn't matter where you're joining from or how you're joining from, you start from zero, because that's how the whole world operates. And you got to be able to really work hard and prove yourselves, and really earn the idiosyncrasy credits, for the lack of a better word, to be able to even talk to a lot of the other founders and then see if we can contribute anything meaningful to them. I think you just have to have that perspective in your head to get started, and largely the hustle and hard work that comes with it. And you got to be really resilient. I think that's probably one of my biggest learnings, spending a lot of time, maybe not a lot of time, but whatever time I've spent, I think that's been my number one learning, is that you got to be really resilient to either be in this career, because that is the only quality that really separates everybody who is either working in VC or people who are interacting with when you're a VC, which is the founders, right? Founders have to be really resilient and work really hard when the time will be tough, because 99% of the time it will be tough. And you just have to stick around for that 1% highs, both in VC and in the whole entrepreneurship startup journey. So I think either way, if you have some of these qualities within you, and or if you can build some of these qualities over time, and if you also have that perspective, I think that should be more than enough to get started in VC. There's no courses or anything that I did. Yeah, I think maybe my whole exposure into that ecosystem prior to joining Special helped a little bit to get that sense. Yeah.
That sounds very fun, Nitish. I just love your journey. Just looking at your LinkedIn profile was so much fun and actually very inspiring. I should also have, looking back, I think I should have let go of things more quickly and tried more new things more willingly. But yeah, this is super fun, and I love your energy. And I wish you a lot of luck, a lot of more exciting opportunities, more engaging, thrilling, all the adjectives, all these fun opportunities for you. And I wish you a lot of, more than everything, I wish you a lot of fun ahead.
Thank you so much, Rashna. Thanks. Yeah.